If you are still here, then understand something very deeply. Most people don't struggle because life is unclear. They struggle because their own mind is unclear about what it truly wants. They wake up with random goals, shifting desires, and borrowed dreams from others. And in that confusion, they keep moving, but not in any real direction. They stay busy, but not aligned. And busy without clarity slowly becomes frustration. This is where everything begins. Before discipline, before success, before strategy, there is one silent foundation that decides everything: clarity. Shi Heng often points toward this simple truth that many people ignore. If your mind is scattered, your life will be scattered. Because life does not follow noise, it follows direction. Think about it carefully. A person who wants everything, but cannot clearly define anything, is already creating inner conflict. One part of the mind wants success, another part wants comfort. One part wants change, another part fears change. And in this internal contradiction, energy is wasted, not in action, but in confusion. When you are unclear about what you want, every opportunity looks attractive, but none feels right. You start many things, but you complete very few. You get inspired easily, but you lose direction just as quickly. And slowly, you begin to believe that you lack discipline, when in reality, you lack focus. Clarity is not just about writing goals on paper. It is about deeply understanding what actually matters to you, not what looks impressive to others. Many people chase lifestyles they don't even want, just because they saw someone else living them. But borrowed desire is always weak. It collapses under pressure. Shi Heng's wisdom encourages a return to simplicity. Instead of chasing everything at once, you begin by asking one honest question: what do I truly want? Beyond fear, beyond comparison, beyond social pressure. This question is uncomfortable at first, because it forces you to look inward instead of outward. And when you sit with this question honestly, something starts to shift. You begin to notice that not everything you are chasing is actually important. Some things are just distractions dressed as ambition. Some goals are not yours. They are noise from the outside world that you absorbed without questioning. Once clarity begins to form, your energy changes. You stop scattering your attention in 10 directions. You start focusing on fewer things, but with more depth. And this is where real progress begins. Not in doing more, but in doing what actually matters. Even your daily decisions start becoming easier. Because when you are clear, you don't need to constantly debate every choice. You already know your direction, so you simply evaluate whether something moves you closer or further away from it. Shi Heng often highlights that clarity itself is a form of discipline, because a clear mind does not waste energy on confusion. It does not get easily distracted by every opportunity. It stays rooted in purpose, even when external noise tries to pull it away. Over time, something very powerful happens. You stop feeling mentally exhausted from overthinking every option. You stop feeling stuck between too many choices. Instead, you begin to feel steady. Not because life became easier, but because your direction became simpler. And slowly, you realize something important. Clarity does not limit you. It frees you. Because when you know exactly what you want, you stop chasing everything. You start building something meaningful, step by step, with intention instead of confusion. And that is where real transformation begins. Not in having more options, but in finally knowing what actually deserves your full attention. If you are still here, then understand something very quietly powerful. Most people spend their entire life chasing results, while completely ignoring the way they are trying to get those results. They push harder, they work longer, they stress more, but deep inside, nothing feels stable. Because chasing creates pressure, and pressure without alignment always leads to burnout, not fulfillment. There is a deeper truth that Shi Heng often reflects on. What is meant for you does not require force. When you force something, you are usually moving against your own natural flow. And anything that requires constant force is not truly aligned with you. It may look good from the outside, but internally it feels heavy. Think about how most people approach success. They believe that if they just push harder, eventually everything will fall into place. So they keep chasing money, chasing status, chasing recognition, chasing validation. But in this chasing, they often lose something more important: their inner balance. Chasing creates a mindset of lack. It constantly tells your brain that you are not enough yet, that you are not there yet, that something is missing. And from that mental state, every action becomes slightly desperate. Even achievements start feeling temporary because the foundation is not peace. It is pressure. Shi Heng's wisdom points toward a different path: alignment. Alignment does not mean sitting still and waiting. It means moving in a way where your actions, thoughts, and direction are working together instead of fighting each other. When you are aligned, effort still exists, but it feels natural, not forced. When you chase something, your attention is always ahead of you. You are constantly thinking about the outcome, the result, the destination. But when you align yourself, your attention comes back to the present. You focus on what you are doing right now, because you trust that consistent direction will naturally lead you forward. And this shift changes everything internally. Instead of anxiety, you begin to feel stability. Instead of desperation, you begin to feel calm persistence. Instead of rushing, you begin to move with awareness. You are still working, still improving, still growing, but without the internal chaos of chasing. Many people misunderstand this concept. They think alignment means laziness or lack of ambition. But in reality, alignment is the most powerful form of discipline, because it requires you to stay consistent, even when results are not immediate. It requires patience when the mind wants speed. It requires trust when nothing is visible yet. Shi Heng often emphasizes that nature itself follows alignment, not force. Water flows naturally, not violently. Trees grow steadily, not desperately. Even time moves without rushing. And yet, everything in nature still reaches its destination in the right way, at the right time. When you stop chasing and start aligning, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer feel like you are constantly fighting your own life. Instead, you feel like you are working with it. Your decisions become calmer. Your direction becomes clearer. Your energy becomes more stable. Over time, something important begins to happen. You stop measuring your worth by how fast things are happening. You start valuing consistency over speed. You begin to understand that sustainable success is not created through pressure, but through steady, aligned movement. And slowly, the need to force outcomes begins to fade. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started trusting a deeper process. A process where effort is important, but alignment is everything. And that is where life starts to feel different. Not heavier, but lighter. Not forced, but natural. Not chaotic, but quietly powerful. Because you are no longer chasing everything outside you. You are finally moving in harmony with what is already meant for you. If you are still here, then understand something very quietly powerful. Before life ever becomes stable on the outside, it must first become stable on the inside. Most people try to fix their life by changing their circumstances, but they ignore the most important part: the state of their mind. And an undisciplined mind can turn even good opportunities into confusion. Shi Heng often emphasizes a simple but deeply overlooked truth. You cannot build a strong life with a weak mind. Because no matter what you achieve externally, if your inner world is chaotic, you will never truly feel stable. You may reach goals, but you will not feel grounded in them. Think about how your mind actually works. One moment it is focused, the next moment it is distracted. One moment it is motivated, the next moment it is doubtful. It constantly jumps between thoughts, emotions, fears, memories, and expectations. And in this constant movement, energy gets scattered. When your mind is not disciplined, it becomes reactive. It reacts to everything: comments, situations, failures, comparisons, emotions. And every reaction pulls your energy away from your focus. Slowly, you become busy but not productive, active but not aligned, moving but not progressing in a stable direction. Shi Heng's wisdom brings attention back to control. Not control over the outside world, but control over your inner world. Because the real battle is not outside you, it is inside you. It is the battle between distraction and focus, between impulse and awareness, between reaction and discipline. When you begin to master your mind, something very subtle starts to change. You stop believing every thought that appears. You stop reacting to every emotional wave. You start observing instead of immediately responding. And in that small gap between stimulus and reaction, real power begins to grow. Most people underestimate this inner control. They think success comes from more action, more effort, more hustle. But without mental discipline, more action simply creates more chaos. You may do more, but you achieve less stability, because your direction keeps changing with your emotions. Mental discipline does not mean suppressing thoughts or emotions. It means not being controlled by them. It means you can feel something without being pulled into it completely. You can think something without believing it immediately. You can experience pressure without losing clarity. Shi Heng often teaches through simplicity. The mind must become a tool, not a master. Right now, for many people, the mind is leading them. It dictates mood, behavior, decisions, and reactions. But when discipline develops, you begin to lead your mind instead. This is where real transformation starts. Not in changing your environment, but in changing your inner response to it. When your mind becomes disciplined, your life starts to stabilize automatically. Because now, your decisions are not random. They are intentional. Slowly, you begin to notice something powerful. You are no longer easily distracted by everything around you. You are not constantly pulled into unnecessary thoughts. You are not emotionally unstable based on temporary situations. Instead, you develop a sense of inner stillness even when life is active. And from that stillness, clarity begins to grow. You start thinking more clearly, acting more purposefully, and reacting less emotionally. You stop wasting energy on things that do not matter. And that saved energy becomes your strength. Over time, mental discipline becomes your foundation. Not something you practice occasionally, but something you live with every day. And when this foundation becomes strong, everything else in life starts becoming easier. Not because life changes, but because you change how you move through it. And that is the real essence of mastering your mind. Not controlling the world outside, but becoming unshakable within yourself, no matter what the world does around you. If you are still here, then understand something very deeply. One of the biggest reasons people feel mentally weak in life is not because they cannot handle pain, but because they constantly try to escape it. The moment discomfort appears, they rush to avoid it, distract from it, or suppress it. And in doing so, they never actually build the inner strength required to handle real life. Shi Heng often points toward a simple but uncomfortable truth. Growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in moments where you stay present, even when everything inside you wants to run away. Because real strength is not measured by how easily you avoid difficulty, but by how calmly you can remain within it. Think about how most people react to discomfort. When something feels emotionally heavy, they immediately look for distraction. Phone, entertainment, overthinking, avoidance, anything that temporarily removes the feeling. But the problem is, what you avoid does not disappear. It only gets stored inside you and returns later in different forms. When you consistently avoid discomfort, you train your mind to believe that discomfort is dangerous. So even small challenges start feeling overwhelming. Even minor pressure feels unmanageable. Not because life is too hard, but because your tolerance for difficulty has not been developed. Shi Heng's wisdom encourages a very different approach. Presence instead of escape. Instead of running from discomfort, you learn to stay with it without being controlled by it. You observe it. You allow it to exist without reacting immediately. And in that space of observation, something powerful starts to change. At first, this is not easy. The mind resists. It wants relief, it wants escape, it wants comfort. But when you stay a little longer with discomfort, without reacting, you begin to realize something important. It is not as powerful as it initially appeared. It feels intense, but it is not permanent. This realization slowly builds inner strength, because now you are not afraid of discomfort in the same way. You understand that emotions rise and fall. Situations change. Pressure passes. Nothing stays at the same intensity forever. And this understanding gives you stability. Most people believe strength means never feeling pain. But real strength is being able to feel pain without being controlled by it. It is being able to stay steady while your inner world is moving. It is being able to continue even when things feel uncertain. When you start facing discomfort instead of avoiding it, your entire relationship with life begins to shift. Challenges no longer feel like threats. They start feeling like training. Emotional pressure no longer breaks you immediately. It starts shaping you gradually. Shi Heng often teaches that the mind becomes stronger through exposure, not avoidance. Just like physical muscles grow by facing resistance, emotional and mental strength grow by staying present in difficult situations instead of escaping them. Over time, something very important happens. You become less reactive. You stop panicking when things don't go your way. You stop collapsing under emotional pressure. Not because life becomes easier, but because your inner capacity becomes stronger. And slowly, discomfort loses its control over you. It still appears, but it no longer defines your state. You learn to sit with it, observe it, and move through it without losing yourself in it. And in that process, something powerful develops inside you. Resilience. This resilience is not loud. It does not need validation. It simply exists as an inner stability that cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. And once you develop this, you start realizing that discomfort was never your enemy. It was your training ground. Because every moment you chose to stay instead of escape, you were not suffering. You were strengthening yourself in a way that will support you for the rest of your life. If you are still here, then understand something very quietly powerful. Your mind becomes strongest not when you fight negativity, but when you stop giving it your attention and energy. Most people think mental strength means arguing with negative thoughts, resisting them, or trying to force them away. But in reality, the more you fight something mentally, the more power you give it. Shi Heng often points toward a deeper truth. Whatever you feed with attention grows, and whatever you withdraw attention from slowly loses its influence over your inner world. This is why detachment is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of control. Think about how negativity actually works in daily life. A negative comment, a negative thought, or a negative situation appears, and immediately the mind grabs it. It replays it, analyzes it, overthinks it, and sometimes even builds an entire emotional reaction around it. And in that process, something very small becomes very large inside your head. But the truth is, most negativity only survives because of attention. Without attention, it has no real strength. It is like a shadow. It only exists where light is not focused elsewhere. The moment your awareness shifts, its influence starts to fade. Shi Heng's wisdom encourages a different kind of strength. Not resistance, but awareness. Instead of fighting negativity, you simply stop feeding it. You observe it without engaging. You notice it without becoming it. And slowly, it loses its emotional control over you. At first, this feels unnatural, because the mind is used to reacting. It wants to respond, defend, explain, or overthink everything. But when you begin practicing non-engagement, something changes. You realize that not every thought deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your reaction. Not every emotional trigger deserves your involvement. This is where real detachment begins. Not by pushing things away, but by not holding on to them. When you stop feeding negativity, you stop carrying unnecessary emotional weight. And in that space, your mind becomes lighter, calmer, and more stable. Most people underestimate how much energy is wasted on unnecessary mental engagement. A single negative thought can ruin hours of peace if it is continuously entertained. A small situation can turn into emotional stress if it is repeatedly analyzed. But when attention is removed, the entire structure collapses on its own. Shi Heng often teaches that inner peace is not something you create. It is something you protect by controlling where your attention goes. And attention is your most powerful resource. Whatever you focus on repeatedly becomes your internal reality. When you stop feeding negativity, you are not ignoring life. You are choosing wisely where your energy goes. You are training your mind not to get trapped in unnecessary cycles of thinking. You are building emotional independence from external triggers. Over time, something very powerful happens. You begin to notice that situations still occur, thoughts still appear, and challenges still arise. But your reaction to them becomes weaker. They no longer pull you in as deeply as before. You observe more and react less. This shift creates a deep sense of inner freedom, because now your peace is not dependent on what happens outside. It is dependent on how you choose to respond internally. And when response becomes conscious instead of automatic, control returns to you. Slowly, negativity loses its authority. It still exists in the world, but it no longer dominates your inner state. You begin to live with a quieter mind, a lighter emotional load, and a stronger sense of awareness. And that is the real power of detachment. Not fighting darkness, but simply refusing to let it live inside your attention. If you are still here, then understand something very deeply. True strength is not shown in how loudly you react to life, but in how calmly you stay steady when everything around you feels uncertain. Most people believe mental strength is about control over situations, but real strength is actually control over your inner state while situations remain unpredictable. Shi Heng often highlights a very important truth. Life is constantly changing, but your reaction to it does not have to be chaotic. Pain, pressure, disappointment, and uncertainty are part of every human experience. The difference between a disturbed mind and a stable one is not the absence of problems, but the ability to stay centered while problems exist. Think about how quickly emotions can take over a person. A single message can change your mood. A small failure can affect your confidence. A slight criticism can shift your entire emotional state. And in that moment, decisions are no longer made from clarity. They are made from emotion. And emotional decisions often lead to regret. This is why emotional control becomes one of the most important skills for inner strength. When you learn to pause before reacting, you create space between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, awareness begins to grow. Shi Heng's wisdom teaches that most suffering does not come from situations themselves, but from uncontrolled emotional reactions to those situations. The situation happens in one moment, but the mind continues it for hours, sometimes even days. And that continuation is what creates unnecessary mental burden. When you begin to observe your emotions, instead of immediately following them, something important starts to change. You realize that emotions are temporary. They rise, they peak, and they eventually pass. But when you react instantly, you extend their influence unnecessarily. Emotional control does not mean suppressing what you feel. It means understanding what you feel without being controlled by it. You allow emotions to exist, but you do not let them decide your actions. You feel, but you do not become the feeling completely. At first, this level of awareness takes practice. The mind is used to instant reaction. It wants immediate expression, immediate response, immediate judgment. But when you start slowing down your reactions, you begin to notice that not every situation requires urgency. Shi Heng often emphasizes that calmness is not something you find. It is something you build through awareness and discipline. And every time you choose awareness over reaction, you strengthen that calmness within yourself. Over time, something very powerful begins to develop. You stop being easily shaken by emotional triggers. Situations still happen, but they do not destabilize your entire mindset. You become more grounded, more balanced, and more observant. Even in difficult moments, there is a sense of inner space. Instead of being completely absorbed by emotion, you are able to watch it from a slight distance, and that distance gives you clarity.